it's really difficult for me to talk about something like this because of the tragic nature of what happened, also the gravity of the situation. I don't want to say the wrong thing because of how delicate the situation is, right? But that kind of puts me in a bind because I have so many frustrations with what has occurred and the discussions that are being had around it. So I'm going to say what I'm going to say. I might bleep some stuff out just because, as much as I want to be able to speak as raw as possible, like somebody like me who wants to be able to do that, I'm outnumbered 1,000,000,000,000, right? So I say something or someone else says something and they want to be raw and authentic, but the internet doesn't like that, then their stuff is taken down. So their voice is no good if it's not accessible. So I'm trying to learn that as I go. I'm trying to be self-conscious about that. But I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Like I said, if I need to, I will bleep some stuff out. That way I don't offend anyone. I'm going to try not to offend anyone in saying what I'm saying, but I'm still going to say it anyway. There was a shooting that occurred in Colorado Springs, I want to say this morning, right? This guy walks into I think an LGBTQ nightclub down there in Colorado Springs, and he shoots it up. He kills 5 people. He wounds 19, I think. And the response around it has pissed me off, and that's what this is really going to be about. But I just want to say something real quick before I start, because I was having a conversation the other day, and it was something that just kind of came to my mind. There was a shooting that occurred in Texas a few months back. There's this one now. There was a shooting that occurred in a movie theater earlier in the decade, right? School shootings are what feels like commonplace in this country now. And if you look at who carries them out, right? Who does it, right? Is it either men or is it women? It's men. At least in my 21 years of being on this earth, I've never ever seen a woman carry out a mass shooting or a school shooting. Not saying it hasn't happened, but the ones that I've seen, right, the ones that have been publicized, I've never seen it not be a man. And in my head, I'm trying to understand that, right? I know that as men, we are naturally more aggressive, right? We fight in wars. If you look at prisons, more men are in there for violent crimes than women are in there. You look at most abusers, they're men. Like, I understand that we have a natural inclination to be aggressive, right? We are generally stronger, faster, all those things, right? So a lot of the cases when used poorly, it's a recipe for disaster. But that's not a specific explanation for why these things happen, because I'm a man and I've never done any of the heinous things that you see out here because I control myself. I control my mind. I control my body, right? So I never get to that point. But for some reason, these men, these young men, I should say, they keep doing this. They keep shooting these places up. And I'm thinking, why? Right? Like I feel like this is obviously something that wasn't commonplace back then, right? You didn't have, these level of guns, right? And at one point you didn't have guns, period. So I mean, this isn't something that has just been occurring over the course of history. This is very, very specific to like recent history. And like I said, in my head, when I was having that conversation, I'm trying to think about it. I'm trying to figure out how to rationalize it. Be like, why is it that men, like young men, a lot of them who kind of fit the same profile, why do they keep doing this? Why do they keep going into schools and hospitals and movie theaters and nightclubs unprovoked, right? And then they just shoot them up. And there's a bunch of different things you could come up with, but I feel like I have the best explanation that I'm probably going to get unless someone tells me otherwise. If you look at these individuals, right, you do not see them as real men. At least I don't, right? I don't believe that a real man would go into these establishments and shoot them up. I just don't believe that, and I find it very troubling if anybody else believes that these are real men. And I'm not talking about biologically. You know what I mean, right? But the question I have is why, right? Like these, like I said, a lot of them fit the same profile. A lot of them are between 18 and like 22. This guy who shot up this place, this nightclub in Colorado, he was 22. So what is it with these guys, right? A lot of them are loners, right? Or they got issues mentally. Like what is the deal with these guys? And I'm trying to think, and the one thing that I can definitively link it to, well, not definitively, but one thing that seems very likely, right, that you could link it to and it will make sense, is that these guys are just very, very weak individuals. And you could be like, oh, well, that's self-explanatory. But it's not as simple as that, right? We live in a world where being masculine is toxic, right? So being a real man, right, in turn is toxic. But what I have noticed is that because that is the narrative, there are a lot of people out here who are either being raised in an environment where they're not taught how to be a real man, or when they leave the nest and they're on their own, they will be labeled a misogynist or a sexist or toxic if they want to be a man, if they want to be a manly man, if they want to wear nice clothes, fancy watches, drive cool cars, right? Have a good looking girl, right? If those things qualify as being a manly man, which I mean, it kind of does, right? Like a lot of it is about your character, but I mean, those are characteristics of it. But you look at somebody like that and you say that that person is toxic, that is toxic masculinity. So inadvertently, these people are coming up and not being taught how to be real men. They're not taught how to provide. They're not taught how to protect. They're not taught how to control themselves, their bodies, their minds. I know we live in this progressive world, and this might be the offensive part that some people, might be off put by, but biology is a thing, right? I am a man. If I stand next to a woman, 9 times out of 10, I'm stronger than her. I'm faster than her. And not because I'm some sexist, but because that's just how biology is. So the possibility of me overpowering her is much greater than her overpowering me. Therefore, as a man, understanding the power that you possess and understanding that you have a great responsibility with that power as well, your ability to control yourself, right, to the point where you can interact with people and they don't see you as a threat, right? That is important. That is so crucial to being a man. But that has gone out the window because in this day and age, it is toxic to be masculine. But what I argue is that it is toxic for a man to be unmasculine, if that's even a word, because they are not taught properly how to navigate life, in my opinion, the way that they should, right? Because these guys are, science says that the brain doesn't develop to 25. These guys are barely 20. So they were not kids that long ago. I'm 21. And when I think about it, I was in middle school like a few years ago, like really thinking about it. Like I was in middle school when I was 13, 14. So like 6 to 7 years ago. That's not a very long time. So it's not like I've had this whole life experience, right? And then I just made this rash decision to go shoot something up when I'm 67, right? These guys are in their late teens or early 20s, which means that they are still developing. They are still very impressionable and they're still learning stuff. So if society says that being masculine is toxic and these kids are not growing up in an environment where they're taught to be real men, those are people I identify as loose cannons. Those guys are more dangerous than masculine men, in my opinion, because they don't know how to operate. And this is not me trying to justify why they do what they do, like to abstain them from responsibility. They're wrong. But look at their age. A lot of them, they follow the same trend. Like I said, their ages are very similar. They're loners. They got issues. I'll get to it in a second. But this kid threatened his mother with a bomb.
His mother reportedly called cops after she said he threatened her with a homemade bomb.
Like that's not okay. And this was last year, so let's just say that he was 21 at the time, right? Like why is this happening? Right? Like, but no one will want to talk about this trend, and I think it is important to note, right, that if we are to continue to grow up in a world in which men who want to be men are taught not to be men because it is toxic, well, then you have males who grow up who, at the slightest inconvenience, are going to set off, right? Who don't have social skills, who don't know how to interact with people. Therefore, they are very unpredictable and extremely dangerous compared to someone who society would deem as toxically masculine. It's just crazy to me, the world that we live in, because people are bickering left and right, from both sides about why this happened. But no one is willing to truly understand it, right? Because the answers are probably out there somewhere, right? I'm just spitballing crap. But I know that if I did something like this, my mom and my dad would let me have it. And I can't say what that means specifically because, like I said, the internet, right? They might call CPS and I'm not trying to deal with that. But I would be more scared of them than I would the police or the justice system. I'll just leave it at that. Because I know in my freaking head that that's crazy to do, to go out there and do something like that, to go and shoot up a school or a nightclub because you are emotionally unstable. You don't know how to control yourself, or someone has a point of view that you don't agree with, and that's how you respond to it. You are not a real man, in my opinion. And shaming men for wanting to be men is very detrimental because you end up with people like this who completely spit on what it means to be a real man. Now, with that being said, I want to get to what specifically happened, right? I kind of like briefed it a little bit, but there was a shooting in Colorado, 22-year-old who I haven't heard his freaking name on the news. I'll get to that in a second because that's something else that pisses me off. But 22-year-old kid shoots up a LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado. And you know what the United States of America is doing about it? They are politicizing it. Everything is political. And I saw this guy tweet out something about how, like, you guys talk about you don't want to politicize it, but the reason that this happened is political. Man, you know, I just can't say what I want to say anymore, but moving on, right? So, representative from Colorado, Lauren Boebert, she tweeted out, she said, "The news out of Colorado Springs is absolutely awful. This morning, the victims and their families are in my prayers. This lawless violence needs to end and end quickly." She's a Republican, by the way, so keep that in mind. And AOC, everyone's favorite Democrat, right? She tweeted at her, and she said, "You have played a major role in elevating anti-LGBT plus hate rhetoric and anti-trans lies while spending your time in Congress blocking even the most common sense gun safety laws. You don't get to thoughts and prayers your way out of this. Look inward and change." This is where my frustration lies with politics, and it has always lied, right? One day, when I become the president of the United States, these people are going to not like me at all because I'm going to get on everybody's ass for doing stuff like this, right? What frustrates me about this tweet is the idea that you are blaming this representative. Essentially, that's what that is. You are blaming this representative and asserting that she is responsible or has some responsibility in what happened, in the fact that this 22-year-old man went and shot up this nightclub. I have such a frustration with that. It literally makes me fume because this is what they do, right? And something like this is so insensitive. And before I express my frustration further, I just want to show you an example of this happening again. Senator Josh Hawley was in some hearing about, like, I don't know, women's rights or who can give birth, like something, right? And he was talking to this professor, and she is just alluding to the fact that his line of questioning is transphobic and it is dangerous, and listing off all these statistics. And if I keep talking about it, I'm gonna get pissed off.
Professor Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing that.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist
I'm
is
denying that
dangerous.
trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So
pregnant.
you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're
they're
told
allowed
that
to
they're
question.
opening up people to violence?
We have a good
by
time in my
questioning?
class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this
know,
exchange.
absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yep.
Okay, and then they just start insulting each other at the end. But the point that I want to emphasize is her alluding to the fact that his rhetoric is transphobic and mentioning statistics. She said that 1 in 5 trans people will attempt suicide, and I believe the suicide rate or attempted suicide rate in the trans community is it like 40-something percent or 40% maybe on the dot. And here's where I have an issue with the whole argument, right? Is something will happen, right? Like a crime like this will happen, or someone will commit And like trans advocates or LGBTQ advocates will say that because of your line of questioning, or because of your religious beliefs, or because of anything else that you have said, you are basically to blame for these people doing it. And I think that is absolutely horrible. I'm not a fan if either side does it, right? But it keeps happening in this situation, or in situations like these, where something will happen and these politicians will be like, well, because of your beliefs or because of your rhetoric, this happens. You want to know what that does, and what that appears to me is that you are taking responsibility away from the shooter. You are taking responsibility away from maybe an underlying condition or mental struggle that these children are going through, by alluding to the fact that because someone does not agree with a certain ideology, or they don't agree with a certain lifestyle, or they don't believe in it, for whatever the case may be, whether it's political or religious, you are asserting that it is their fault that this stuff is happening. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and say people aren't influential, but if Lauren Boebert isn't specifically saying, hey, go to LGBTQ nightclubs and shoot at people in them, well, then you cannot blame her for this. And I will say the exact same thing on the other side. During 2020, and I'm black, so I saw this up close and personal, and it pissed me off because what it felt like to me was manipulation. In 2020, just think about it. Every single day you saw another black man be shot and or killed by the police. Where are the videos, right? Where are the videos in 2021 and in 2022 of black men being shot and killed by the police? They're non-existent. But did they just stop? No, they didn't, right? I feel like we were manipulated during that time because, like I said, I'm black, so I'm seeing this up close and personal. I'm seeing hundreds of thousands of people in the street protesting, which I don't have an issue with protest, but like the vast majority of them turn into riots. Gas stations being burned down. You know how many gas stations I drove by that were either defaced or burned down? And this is dating back to middle school. I remember being in middle school and me not being able to go to school for the first 2 weeks of school because of how dangerous it was. Then when I was finally able to go to school, guess what? I drove by a gas station and that mug was burnt to a crisp.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently.
And I'm not going to go into why I felt like it. Like I said, I've talked about that so many times. But the fact of the matter is I felt that we were. But what I'm not going to do is say, hey, AOC, right, this is your fault that these neighborhoods are burned down. Neighborhoods that were already struggling, that don't have any money coming in, that don't have plans for renovating houses, right? Neighborhoods that were already struggling have now been just set back 1,000 years, right? On top of the $600 million in property damage or whatever. But I'm not blaming her or any of these other politicians unless they said, hey, go out into the streets and do this. I can say you were influential, but if someone sets a gas station on fire, you're not going to like it if I say, instead of blaming that individual for setting that gas station on fire, I'm going to blame AOC, or I'm going to blame any other politician who was influential and maybe inspiring some of these people to want to go out and do anything, right? But I can't definitively blame you because you didn't say, hey, go out and do that. That's not fair to you. So in this situation, all I've seen since this thing happened was because group A of politicians is either religious and does not believe in gay marriage, or they believe men are men or women are women, or they believe anything else along those lines, that this is their fault. I looked on AOC's Twitter. I have not seen anything about her condemning the shooter. I look online. I see very little to no information about the shooter. I've watched the news. Nothing. I had to look it up to see who this guy was. What is this kid's name? And it's a double-edged sword because you don't want to give him fame. That's what a lot of these people do it for. They have no solitude within themselves, so they seek it from other people. But you also don't want to sweep this under the rug because then that leaves the door open for politicians to say, hey, this happened because of the other politician that I don't like, right? So I'm gonna blame them for this, right? Which is basically just saying, hey, I'm going to guilt trip you into feeling bad for believing what you believe in, right? So I'm going to try to convince you that you're responsible for this. And not only am I going to make you feel bad, but hopefully you feel bad enough that you fix yourself, right? And now you believe what I believe. Because we're not allowed to have different beliefs and still be able to coexist. It is if you don't believe what I believe, well then it is your fault that something like this happened. But I mean, what the hell, bro? Like, this kid's name is Anderson Aldrich. He's facing 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of a bias-motivated crime causing bodily injury, according to an online docket in El Paso County courts. Now, once again, I'm not saying people can't be influenced, but everyone is influenced. Like I said, I can say that these politicians who hyped up all this stuff in 2020 influenced a bunch of people to burn down the neighborhoods that I live in, that people who look like me live in. But that would not be fair unless you explicitly said, hey, go out there and do that, which I've heard some politicians say.
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And those politicians need to be held accountable because of the influence that they have, right? So you're directly telling people to go do things. Yeah, you take some responsibility. But because somebody has beliefs or they have a political view that doesn't align with yours, you think it's okay to blame them, which abstains responsibility from what I'm seeing. I'm going based off what I'm seeing. I'm seeing no tweets condemning the shooter. All I'm seeing are tweets blaming politicians who don't agree with you. And these politicians aren't even interested in the slightest in terms of trying to agree with each other or find some common ground or anything like that. Like, let's look at an example, right? The abortion debate. On one side of the aisle, it is abortion is a woman's right to choose because a baby is not a baby. It is not a person. It has no sovereign rights until its geographical location changes from the womb to outside. That is one argument. The other argument is that a baby is a baby at conception. Therefore, it has life. It has the potential for life. Therefore, it should not be killed. And if you get an abortion, well, then you have killed it. Guess what? Both of these politicians are just going back and forth, right? There's no one that I have seen willing to sit down to get a really big table and throw a bunch of papers on it, a bunch of research, books, articles, and look through them, right? You can film it, right, and post it on freaking the internet, right? But I've seen no one go through, right? Someone from the Republican Party and the Democrat Party and sit down and figure it out, right? Where can we find common ground? Where can we agree? Because in 2022, so many things are up in the air. Like I said this before, do not walk around and say 1 + 1 is 2 because you might get punched in the freaking face. Everything's up in the air and we have no general consensus on what is what anymore. Stuff is just floating, bro. So no one is willing to sit down and cipher through everything, right? Figure out where we can like find some common ground. You're not going to please everybody, but you got to have at least the majority of people be able to coexist on something. We literally hate each other more than other countries hate us because of that inability to do that. And all these politicians, bro, not all of them. Let me stop saying that. The vast majority of them, they play the game, man. They will say that they care about you, they care about me. I said this the last video. They work harder on the campaign trail than they do when they get in office because to them, this is a game. Look at the White House press secretary. Her job is to make sure that the president looks good by any means necessary and not call him out on his BS.
Hunter or his brother's foreign business dealings.
So look, there's a little bit of interesting, kind of on-brand thinking here.
It's sad, but that's where we're at right now. So no one from either side of the argument wants to come to the center as an advocate for their team, right? Because that's what it is, and say we're going to figure this out as best as we possibly can. Instead, you have politicians like AOC, which I respect AOC's passion. I do. But I'm not down with stuff like this. Going on Twitter and blaming other politicians who you don't agree with for a shooting like this instead of acknowledging the fact that the shooter should be blamed. Don't look at me and say, well, that should just be self-explanatory. Absolutely not. No, I'm starting to get suspect, right? I genuinely feel like politicians blame each other more than they blame the actual criminals who commit crimes. It's absolutely ridiculous. I just can't believe it. And you tweet that. You look at the tweet and you review it and you keep it up, right? It's been up for a day. The whole day this tweet's been up since the story broke this morning, right? So like come on now, bro. And then her tweet, right? She talked about how Lauren Boebert is blocking common sense gun safety laws, right? And this is where I'm gonna end it. Once again, another topic in which people are not willing to come to the center. It's either get rid of all guns or everyone needs a gun, right? Instead of finding some common ground. But actually, you know what? They're actually playing it smart. I would even say a lot of politicians, they are purposefully lingering in the middle, and not how you may think, right? They're not in the middle trying to find common ground. They're just in the middle of the whole situation. That way the gun debate can still be a thing. Think about it. A school shooting happens, shooting at a nightclub happens, shooting at a movie theater happens. Politicians, they offer their thoughts and prayers, which are always appreciated, even though it doesn't bring anybody back. It's the least you can do. And then for like the next 3 to 4 days, they'll talk heavily about how they're going to implement new gun legislation or they're going to look at gun laws. And then after that 3 to 4 days is up, silent. Right? They put 2 zippers on their mouths, right? That's how silent they are about it.
What are you winking for? Brilliant.
Because if they actually lift a finger to solve the gun issue, regardless of what that might be, regardless of what the solution is, if they actually lift a finger to do something about it, guess what? That takes that issue off the board. That's one less thing that they can campaign on. And the gun debate is a very big debate. If you are a politician and you don't have the gun debate to debate about, you have just essentially knocked out a whole demographic of people who might vote for you, because a lot of people might vote on that front, right? Who will either protect their right to bear arms or who will do away with it, right? Or put a lot of restrictions on it. You solve that, that checks that off the board. That's one less argument that people can have. But we can't have unity because political parties don't exist. They only exist with division. So they're going to continue to linger in the middle but not really say much about it. But my frustration with the gun debate comes from a lot of ignorance, in my opinion, right? Where on one side you have get rid of all guns, and on the other side you have everybody needs a gun. Honestly, I'm fine with either, but the fact is that the government isn't lifting a finger. And I'll tell you why I'm fine with either. In my perfect world, guns don't exist. If we could live in a country where guns did not exist, I would be very, very happy with that. But the reality is that, at least last time I checked, there are more guns than there are people. So the possibility of that occurring is slim to none. It's very unrealistic. So then you go to the other side where you say, everyone should be encouraged to get a gun. Everyone should be encouraged to get one to protect themselves. That makes sense as well. But where a lot of people come in on the gun debate, especially a lot of politicians, they come at it from a place of ignorance. These are people who have never shot a gun before. These are people who don't know gun terminology. I'm no expert on guns, but I've shot guns before. I know gun terminology to a degree. And these are people who think that AR stands for assault rifle. It does not. It stands for Armalite, which is like a gun company. I think it was made in like the 50s or 40s or something like that. But like a lot of the gun debate, and it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, a lot of it comes from ignorance, where you don't know the gun terminology, you never shot a gun before, etc. So these politicians saying we need stricter gun laws, if you have no plans to either arm everyone or to get rid of guns, period, implementing those in the general sense means that you are going to be hurting law-abiding citizens more than you will be hurting criminals. The reason why people are criminals is because they don't care about the law. So a gun law doesn't mean anything to them because there are more guns than people, which means that they don't need to get a gun legally. They can go get a gun illegally. Now, I think that this guy, I don't know if he got it illegally or illegally, so I'm not going to comment on it. But the point that I'm trying to make is that at that point, you are now making law-abiding citizens jump through hoops, right, to get guns. And in some places where they have the strictest gun laws, most people aren't willing to go to those lengths, right, whatever they may be. So if you're a criminal who looks at a place like Colorado, who last time I checked had out of the 50 states, had the 14th strictest gun laws, you're thinking in your head, the possibility that somebody in this establishment has a firearm that might try to combat me is slim to none. Therefore, I'm going to carry out this heinous act. And then bam, it happens. Now, like I said, I'm not trying to argue one or the other in terms of policy. I'm saying do one or the other. Either put an initiative out to get rid of all guns or put an initiative out to teach people how to use a firearm, teach people about guns in general so that they are not so intimidated by them. But the idea is that you teach people how to use guns and you encourage them to get guns, now people are going to get them and they're just going to start shooting each other, right? But I like to compare it to like people having cars. We encourage people to go get cars. When you turn 16, go get your freaking permit or your license or whatever. And when you get a little bit older, if your parents haven't already gotten you a car, save up some money, go get a car. It's kind of necessary. We don't ride horses anymore, on the street at least, on the highway. So we encourage people to go get cars. You don't see people on the highway just swerving around purposefully, just trying to kill each other. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what crime occurs, regardless of people's disagreements with each other, at the end of the day, the vast majority of people have virtually the same goal. I want to wake up, I want to leave the house, I want to go do my business, whatever that is, and I want to return home safely. That is why you don't go on the highway and you just see people just boom, bashing into each other, just swerving into each other for no reason at all. So I think the same would apply to guns, is that if there is no initiative to get rid of guns, period, then teaching people about guns, encouraging them to purchase guns, easing any anxieties they have about them so that they're not so intimidating, I feel like people would purchase guns with the idea that I will use it if I need to protect myself or my family. Because at the end of the day, people will still share the same sentiment for the most part, that I want to leave the house. I want to wake up. I want to leave the house. I want to do my business, whatever that may be, and I want to return home safely. Now, could it be a risk? Yeah, we haven't tried it before, right? Where the government has come out and encouraged people to learn about guns. Maybe go to a shooting range, learn about attachments, like all these things, right? Like, we don't encourage that. But we're also not saying, hey, we have started a widespread, strong initiative to get rid of all guns. And when I say all guns, I mean all guns. Because once again, criminals do not care about laws. That's what makes them criminals. So they have the entire illegal gun market at their disposal. If you make it harder for law-abiding citizens to get guns, but you haven't addressed the illegal market, you have just made law-abiding citizens more vulnerable to gun attacks, especially in states in which the gun laws are very strict. Criminals will say, in this place, there's probably no one with a firearm. But because I'm a criminal, either I have a gun that I purchased a while back, or I got it illegally, I am confident that I can go in here and I can carry out any heinous act that I want to with at least a few fatalities before I'm stopped. And in this situation, like I said, the guy wasn't stopped because someone shot him. He was stopped because he was tackled. Now, shout out to the guy who tackled him. Thank God for him. But my point is that there are so many problems surrounding this topic. And like I said, I try to be self-aware of how I'm saying it, because like I said, I don't want to offend anybody, so I will try to mute certain things, right? But like, the point is there, man. It is. This is absolutely horrible. And I don't want to give this coward any freaking daylight without mentioning the victims of the shooting. So rest in peace to Ashley Pogg, Kelly Loving, Raymond Green Vance, Daniel Aston, and Derek Rump. And my condolences to their families as well. Like I said, it's so unfortunate that stuff like this has to happen. But politicians won't get off their ass and do something about it. They'd rather bark at each other on Twitter because they're so cool. Man, don't let me become president. Because y'all would think that my job description was to make their life a living hell.